Hi, everyone coming in. We're just going to wait a minute or two to let everyone trickle in from the waiting room, but thanks so much for being here. Alrighty. It is a minute after 2 today for our supporting your student through the first year. This webinar will be recorded, so if you aren't able to make it through the whole entire webinar, no worries. We are going to have this recording posted to the new student orientation website in a couple of days. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Francesca Span. I'm the director of new student orientation, and I am joined by a couple of my lovely colleagues. Amy Milne, the director of the Office of Student Accessibility, Katie McFadden, the director of the College Advising Center, Dr. Robin Kyler, the interim director of the Counseling Center, as well as Dr. Benjamin Mayos, the director for Campus Living. We are so excited to have you all here today. There's a few things I want to let you know about right off the bat. I mentioned that this webinar will be recorded. We will also be offering this same session in person during parent and family preview, which will be Wednesday, August 24th, the same day as new student move-in. If you haven't already RSVP'd to attend parent and family preview, I highly encourage you to do so if you plan on being in person with your student on move-in day. I can drop some links in the chat as we progress through this webinar today. But essentially, there's going to be two parts. We're going to start by hearing from all of the wonderful people on this panel, and then we'll have some time at the end to answer questions that you might have. Our Q&A box will be open during the entirety of this webinar, and I will be cycling through answering some questions, and we might hold some off till the end to address to the whole group. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Amy Milne to kick us off for today.
Thanks, Fran. Hi, everybody. My name is Amy. I am the director of the Office of Student Accessibility, as Fran talked about. I have been working at the college for a little over 8 years in various different roles, but primarily my role has always been around supporting our students. I've always been one who either was helping students transition to college or make changes once they've been here. So I've walked this path with a lot of our students on how they transition to the process of coming to the college. I'm also, interesting enough, as we were talking about putting this together, I'm also somewhat of a peer. I have one kid who's already launched to college, and then my youngest is actually, in 2 weeks, I will be taking her to New York for her first year of college. So a lot of, as we were talking through, I was relating to not only professionally, but personally, as I think about the anticipation around sending your kid far away from home. So Katie, do you want to hit the next slide? Perfect. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of things that your student might face, but I wanted to put together, things that I commonly see for students that they struggle. Homesickness is very common, and really recognizing that that comes in waves. So students come in the excitement, and they might not start to feel the homesickness till 2 or 3 weeks down through the term. The anticipation of fitting in, the navigating, balancing the academics and their social life, possible conflicts with roommates, maybe engaging in some risk-taking behavior, transitions, whether it's coming home for the first time, which actually can be a really significant transition for your student. On and on, like there's so many challenges that happen to the first year. And as we think about this as professionals supporting your student, so many of these challenges are skills that they just haven't learned yet. So a lot of what you'll hear us talk about today is being patient with your child's process as they learn these new skills, and recognizing that some things that come so easy to us as people who have had time to had multiple transitions or know how to advocate for themselves. This may be your student's first time doing this. And so one of the biggest tips and one of the biggest things that I can tell you is to be patient with your student and resist the urge to jump in right away, but let them learn how to navigate processes by themselves. A great analogy I tell when I'm talking to parents about this is, I don't know how many of you all have had the experience of either being an experienced driver and then learning to drive a stick afterwards, or actually teaching somebody that skill. So you can be very capable, being able to drive no problem, and then suddenly you're driving a stick and it's like, whoa, I am all new again, new in driving, and it can be scary. And I can tell you, as someone who did this with their teenager, being the co-pilot as someone is learning to drive a stick can be very challenging and scary, and you're holding your breath and sometimes you just want to look away, right? So that's often the analogy I tell with parents as they are supporting their student with going through this first year. Katie, will you, so before we get into some of the more some specific resources that I can offer you, I want to bring in my colleague, Dr. Kyler, to talk a little bit about, in really brief, broad strokes, about just developmental stuff that's happening with you, both you and your child. And then I'm going to step back in. So Robin?
Thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge that you've been going through development alongside your children for many, many years now. And it's really, sometimes we fall into that belief that we're done at a certain point. And I just want to share that there's still more to come for your development together as child and parent. Or caregiver. And so I just put together this really simple, quick 5 of the developmental processes that college students are going through. This is not again, also an exhaustive list, but an important one to kind of consider, that as your student is engaging in a new environment of college, one of the big pieces that they're working on is developing a sense of competency and just a feeling that I can do this on my own. And the tough part in parallel for caregivers who have been raising these kids and do trust them is sort of letting them make some mistakes, sort of fail forward a little bit. Trust that you have given them some really good foundational skills. Remind yourself that while they may not do it in the same way that you may have recommended, that they are finding their own path. A part of this developmental process is also achieving more of a clear sense of their own individuated identity. And while your student is going through that in so many ways at various different points of development, this is the first time for many of you that they will be really engaging in that identity development farther away from home. And it requires sort of a redefinition of your role as well. You are working towards moving from that direct caretaker role. And some of you started this already. It's just another stage to move more into ultimately that adult parent or adult caregiver kind of role as more of a mentor or an advisor, and often a source of refuge and support. Your students are also just experimenting with their growing independence. They have been doing that for a while. I will share with Amy, along with Amy, I also have my oldest kid is just going to be starting into her sophomore year. So I went through this same process with my oldest last year. And being aware of these developmental stages doesn't always make them easier. And so really sort of stepping back and letting them learn through trial and error can sound, all of these things sound very simple. In practice, sometimes it's pretty hard to do. Another big piece of an additional level of development for students in this coming year and stage of development all the way through college is learning new ways to manage their own emotions. Many of you will have students who have always been very, very steady, and they're experiencing so much new at the same time that their emotions may be something that they're still learning to navigate. That doesn't mean they will be out of control or anything. It just means they're finding ways to do that with new support networks and trying to find new strategies for sort of calming or expressing themselves in really adaptive ways. And that for you might also come along with your own set of emotions to manage. You might be feeling some anxiety, some excitement, worry, loss, fear, joy, pride. There's just a whole lot of different ways that we will experience our emotions throughout this time when our kids are moving farther away and starting to do their own thing, and there's not as much of a constant touch point with them. And this is a natural process, and really you can be a great model for your kid to show them, we expect you to have all kinds of mixed feelings, and we're having them too, and we're going to work through those, both together and individually. And also, finally, in the young adult development, one of the major stages of development is achieving intimacy. And so it's sort of that moving away from the next, sort of the nuclear kind of web of whatever the family environment has been, into sort of developing more peer intimacy. By this, I mean relationships, not necessarily romantic relationships, though that's in there as well. And so it's really important to kind of recognize that some of the time you will know what's going on, and some of the time you won't know what's going on. Some students struggle to find those relationships, and others just quickly engage with a large group of acquaintances and friends. And it's hard to predict exactly what our own kids are going to do, because those students may have a different experience as they're coming into college. Fortunately, there's lots of, we'll be talking about a lot of networks of support. Meanwhile, part of your development as caregivers is to learn how to remain close in the ways that you want to remain close with your student without being overly involved, and being able to step back and give them the time to share with you what they are learning about themselves through all of these different developmental stages. And I'm gonna shift it back to Amy now to talk about some examples.
Thanks, Robin. So sort of this is the great balancing act, right? Of how do you allow your student to take this next developmental stage, knowing that every student that comes to the college is coming with their own specific set of experience, their challenges. I don't think anyone on this panel is saying like, this is the way to parent this particular student. So being really aware that, this is hopefully some data points for you to have conversations with your student about what does it mean for us as a family, as a group, on how we can sort of all move through this next transition, but in a way that feels one where we can support one another and all learn and fail, right? I think that's, fail forward. That's a really important thing. So the biggest start to this is often, and some people may have already been experiencing this, but the student is the center of all communication. This is a really, I work with our students with disabilities, where oftentimes the caregiver and their parents are very active in supporting that student to make sure that their access to their education is put in place. When they come to college, the center of the communication is with the student. Any email is going to the student. There isn't a parallel process of communication. So, this means like, who's getting what information, who's sharing what information, what are you expecting your student to share with you, and being really clear and upfront about that. Katie's going to talk a little bit about FERPA towards the middle of our presentation, but that's another piece of, what is the student saying that you're allowed to have information from the college? So that shifts, that's a big shift. And I would say it's not only a shift for parents, with students I'll say, well, were you able to send your letter for your accommodations, or did you talk to your faculty X? They're like, well, no, but I think my mom or my dad is going to take care of that, because their world as well. Parents have stepped in and been oftentimes the center of communication. really having that conversation around what's normal, what's venting frustration normal, and what signifies a true crisis. And again, this is something where, as parents and caregivers, having an idea, especially if you have a student who may have had some significant struggles in their K-12 experience, have had some growth with mental health, but maybe also had times where their mental health really significantly impacted them. What is it, where do you know they're on the path for something that's more dangerous, and where is it that they're going to be struggling? Because we make change, we learn, growth happens in struggle. And so expecting our student to come to college and not struggle means we're taking away from them that experience to actually learn, to grow, grit, resilience, all these amazing things that happen for us when we struggle. But when we come in and save our kids from struggling, they don't have those experiences. So it's like that, again, that balancing act of where do you step in and where do you step back, kind of be able to say like, all right, using that analogy of the driving a stick shift, where am I just going to go back and forth, but I'm not going to take the wheel. I'm not going to open my mouth. I'm going to let them drive. So being patient. I talked to a lot of students about failure now versus failure later, and I call it little failure now, big failure later, in that this is a great place to fail. This is a great place to recognize that, oh, get curious. I always say curious without judgment, but that didn't work. I'm consistently late to my class. I'm struggling to get my assignments in. I wonder what's going on there. And so learning those skills now is going to be what helps them to be more successful when they're out of the college and into the working world, or whatever their next stage of life is going to be. Some of the hard conversations that we have with students is maybe if they don't pass a class, or they have to take time away from college because it's not working, and recognizing that learning from that, having growth around those experiences is so valuable for what you want to do with your next experience. So as caregivers and parents, it's really hard to sit and watch your student fail, and maybe seeing patterns that you thought like, oh, I thought we were past this. I thought they knew how to do this. And then you see it happening. Going back to that slide, there's so many new skills and so many new things in place for them that it might be that they slip back. They're not as good about managing their time. They're more involved in their social life than their academic life. So as a parent caregiver, where is it? When are we stepping into crisis? When are we stepping into something that I need to interject in? And where can I step back and say, I'm going to let them sort this out on themselves, even if it hurts a little bit, even if they have to have a lower grade. It's that, again, what did they learn from that? Where was the growth? Where resilience came out of that? So that's the great balancing act we have now. Katie? No. So some tips on ways to show your support. I'm all about a plan. And again, if you have a student where you have really been actively involved, and then really being really clear about, this is the information I have, and this is the information you have, and who's in charge of what. Perfect example is who's paying the bill, right? Who has access to the financial obligations. So identifying from the beginning who is responsible for what. If your student has had therapy or physicians as a part of their wellness plan, let's get proactive about putting those in place. Our office has a case manager that can help your student get connected to off-campus therapy. Robin's going to talk a little bit more about how you support your student in a term of a crisis, or when there's something more significant than just I'm flunking my class or I'm having a conflict with my roommate, but something where so she'll talk more about those. But I like to see students when they have, especially when it comes to therapy or medication management, if that's been a part of their K-12 experience, then let's get that in place before you come, and you can make an appointment with our case manager to do that. Stay connected to your student. With my son, I made an agreement like once a week we have a FaceTime. I do better if I just see their face, right? So knowing it's like, if your student is wanting to have a little bit more contact, what feels good to them. And also, being mindful that because they're not connected or not in touch with you doesn't mean things aren't going well. right? So you want to kind of have an idea that sometimes life just gets exciting and busy. So, and then being knowledgeable about campus resources. This is a really great trick. And we put together a list for you all of ways that you can encourage your student to get in touch if something's going on. But I find it really helpful if parents, this first year, especially, like, think about, like, I'm going to maybe know that, like, hey, they can make appointments with Advising online, or this is where you would go to make an appointment if you have a sore throat. And I can coach up my student on how to do that. Versus if you're knowledgeable about campus resources prior to something happening, it makes your reaction a lot easier when they call you and say, help, 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 help. You're like, hey, I know you can call the health service, or I know you can call the nurses line. So Katie, do you mind opening that up for me? Oh, go back one screen. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So can you scroll down, Katie? Awesome. So this is a list of campus resources so that you can get on this web page, you can click on it, and you can see, like, where do I help my student get help, right? So when they're calling you and they're saying, you know what, this happens quite a bit with our students. They had a 504, an IEP in high school. They hope that when they come to college, somehow they no longer need any of those supports in place. And then they get through the first terms, midterms, and they're like, I am not the learner. I am not showing myself as the way I know I can be. And so you can say, you know what, sounds like you need to get some assistance. Why don't you call the Office of Student Accessibility? And we do our appointments online. So you can even pull up the website with them. Look at here, you can make an appointment, and so make an appointment with one of our providers and we can get you started. So going through that website, going through the resources that we've listed here, I think really helps. One, it helps you all create a plan and being proactive, but it also, when the student calls at 10 o'clock at night and is feeling a need for an answer, you've got a place to go. So that's a great resource. This is a tip that I have wonderful memories of college. It was also difficult because that's how life is, right? Ups and downs. And a lot of times students will be coming in and things will not be going really well. And they're like, these are supposed to be the best years of my life. And it's like, these are important years in your life. They may not be the best. They may be fantastic. They may be really hard. But I think setting students up to think that this is going to be just fantastic no matter what is a really high standard, because then if it's not, they feel like they're failing. I'm doing something wrong. It's not going well. This isn't the best year's list. I'm doing something wrong. So no, you might not be doing anything wrong. It just means that life kind of goes like this, right? Up and down. Expect changes in the way your student navigates with you. Expect changes in how, some terms will be fantastic. Some may be more difficult. If your student goes abroad, a really sticky transition is when they return back to campus after they've been studying abroad. So expect change. Continue to have the difficult conversations. Continue to keep open communication. Ask the hard conversations. But support their independent decisions. So you can, keep line of communication, but also recognize what Robin, talked about, of trusting their decisions and allowing them to kind of create their own space and their own path. So supporting independent decisions, but continue to have difficult conversations. Next one. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Katie to talk about some transitions that happen academically and some differences between what might have happened for them in their K-12 experience and then coming into college.
Great. Hi, Katie McFadden, Director in the College Advising Center. I thought I'd just walk through 4 or 5 academic transitions that students often comment on or talk with me about during the first year as compared to high school. And the first is something your student likely already experienced this summer, which is just there's a lot more choice in selecting courses. That's usually something they're really excited about. They want to try things they didn't get to try in high school. And I wanted to acknowledge that the flip side is they might feel a little overwhelmed or stressed or anxious about trying to choose the right things between all those options. It's really normal. That's a lot of what I do in my role. It's just helping them understand what the options mean. And along with that, they're taking fewer courses at a time, most of the time, as compared to high school. Just had the conversation yesterday with somebody who said, gosh, Katie, you know, in high school last year, I was doing 7-8 classes at a time. Are you sure I should only have 4 classes? So that's a big adjustment. And I think because there's a lot more choices, only picking 4 courses maybe feels even a little more high stakes because they're not doing as many at a time. And then in high school, they're used to a lot of structure provided by the school day, you know, 7:30 to 2:30 or 8 to 3 or whatever, Monday through Friday, they're in school, in classes, in study hall. There's a lot of structure there with those 7-8 courses at a time. And now in college, they're in 4 classes. And when they look at that weekly schedule, it doesn't look like a lot on the calendar. And so students will say, gosh, do I really have all this free time? You know, it just doesn't seem like a lot. And the difference is, of course, that there's just a lot more unstructured time. And the expectations are higher from the faculty in the classes on how much you're doing outside of class. So they're expected to do a lot of reading before the class session, or memorize the vocabulary for that lesson in the language course, or, you know, do a lot of practice problems for math or science so that they come into the class session ready to ask questions or ready to problem solve. So because that structure isn't provided by the school day the way it was in high school, it might be worth talking with your student about how they're going to do that structure themselves, how they'll build it for themselves. You know, where will they do their work? When will they do their work? And finding a rhythm that really works. I think students who are most successful is often because they find a nice weekly rhythm of what homework they'll do on which days and how to kind of set their day up almost like a school day or a work day with periods of regular prep for classes. Academic feedback is shared differently in college. And by that, I mean, this has come up a lot more just in recent years. Because from what I can tell, I think a lot of students are coming from high schools with a centralized grade portal. And the portal does 2 important functions for them. They can go in and check their grades at any given minute. And then I think for a lot of them, it's also how they track their deadlines and assignments. That the portal says, you know, you have an assignment coming up, or it's 1 day until it's due, or it's 1 day overdue. So they're using that for both those purposes, and they'll need to think through in college how they're going to set up that structure for themselves. So we do have some websites and portals that a few faculty use, but we don't have a centralized system that everyone uses to track grades. Some faculty will have kind of a website or portal. Some will, you know, give grades out at certain times in the semester in very clear ways. And we also have faculty who simply return assignments and tests and expect that students are tracking it themselves and will ask questions if they have them. So, so again, I think it's just an adjustment to get used to, and maybe not just for the student, but for you as a family, if you're really used to having that access to grades all the time, and your student is, and tracking assignment deadlines. So they'll want to have a system for doing that. There is centralized feedback around midterms. Students will each get a digest email that has some feedback about each course and are encouraged to talk with their instructors if they have any questions. So there is that moment, but there's not that day-to-day feedback. And just in general, we have so many great academic resources. They just require student response and initiative. There's Writing Center, Tutoring Center, Language Center, Tutoring Center just for quantitative skill development. Of course, there's faculty office hours, extra study sessions set up, with groups, and especially before midterms and exams, most faculty will set up other opportunities to study. So there's a lot there. It's just a matter of students responding and taking advantage of all those opportunities. I do talk with students a lot, I think, who have the expectation that somehow they're supposed to do all of this absolutely by themselves, that these resources are just for someone who's really struggling or struggling significantly, and that's not true. These resources are truly for everyone, and we know from pulling data that successful students access resources. So no, tutoring is not just for when you're struggling in the class, it's when you're doing fine, but you'd like to get some extra practice in and do that practice really efficiently with an expert next to you, so if you get stuck, you can ask questions. Amy said I'd talk about FERPA a little bit. FERPA is the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act. This is the law that protects students' privacy with regard to any records, but of course in my world it's about the academic records. FERPA is the reason that you can't access your students' grades, that you're not getting their transcripts or have access to that. So that's probably an adjustment from high school. All the info is not going to you, or it's not readily accessible by parents and guardians. Students can initiate a FERPA release with the registrar's office, granting parents or guardians access to specific information of the student's choosing. But keep in mind, like Amy said, the student, we keep our communication central with the student. So even if there's a FERPA release on file, it's not as if I now direct all my communication with the parent. I will still keep the student and I in that conversation. But if you call and ask questions, I can now speak more freely than I could without a FERPA release. So that's what I have. I think Ben is next. Yeah. Ben, you can hop on.
I'm here. I can't undo my video.
Oh no.
All right.
Oh no, there, you're back.
I
Okay.
needed permission. Okay. Yes, I just have a few points about residential transitions as our students, our new residents join us for this year. So living with new people is a living learning journey. And I would say that journey also involves a lot of self-learning. I know as someone who transitioned with a learning disability, every time I've transitioned an environment, whether it was a professional or academic environment, I've had to learn a lot about what it means to navigate that new environment, to find success and to work with others. And we know that students are doing their best in building things like a roommate profile, trying to navigate finding someone. And a lot of what they're putting in there is somewhat aspirational as they're thinking about what made them successful in this previous environment, and how did they live, what was their lifestyle, and sort of projecting that onto what their next living environment is going to look like. And there's going to be a lot of change for them as they navigate new academic lives, social lives, new places of involvement that they start integrating on campus. And over the course of the year and each semester, and really week by week, they're going to gain a better sense of what their needs are, what their preferences are. And so a lot of what we're preparing for right now is this sort of anticipated integration into our community. And so really supporting our students is helping them sort of set their expectations appropriately as they learn more about what their needs are going to be. Next slide. And then going along with that, the goal of campus living and sort of where we focus is on creating opportunities for our students to grow, particularly around communication, and really wanting them to develop some skills and habits that help them, not just with cohabitation, but that is our work, circles around the residential experience. And so we want to help them navigate things that come up. We can't say that conflict won't happen. We certainly want to reduce the likelihood of it, and we want to help them navigate it when it does happen. And so some of the things that we do to try and reduce that likelihood is things like offering an opportunity to write a roommate profile when they're looking for each other in our application, creating living learning communities where they can share passions or purpose with another person that they're living with. And we start the year by asking everyone to complete a roommate agreement that walks through various aspects of living together, and really ask them to start having an open and honest dialogue about what their needs are, how they're going to navigate having guests and things like that. But again, it's a fragile time as people are forging these relationships. They're not always as forthcoming or as strong a self-advocate, or maybe not as aware yet of what their needs are going to be. And so these are not fixed documents. They are living documents, and they are really, as I said, a guide. They're not a contract. There's something to help our students walk through these things, and there's something that we hope they revisit when they recognize that circumstances have changed for them. When students encounter unexpected situations, whether it's socially or academically, we know that they often want to just get the situation solved. And when those situations involve something like facilities, it can be very easy to know what exactly needs to be fixed. It's a leaking pipe. It doesn't always get fixed quickly. It really depends on the circumstances, but the student's role in that situation is limited really to just reporting the issue when it comes up. What's challenging is when the situations that arise are interpersonal. It might be between roommates or people on a floor, but oftentimes it's not straightforward. It's not always quick. And really, to contrast it with something like facilities, an interpersonal situation oftentimes means that the resident needs to be partnering with us on finding the resolution. They need to stay engaged. And so, having support from family or others to help them tap into resources, tap into campus living staff so that we can coach them through, or in some cases be more directly involved in mediation, that's going to be a critical area of support. Next. And then, the staff, we have certain responsibilities and roles. We have resident advisors who are the front line in campus living. The core of their positions is to develop relationships with residents, to allow them to find a sense of belonging, navigate resources, and manage the unexpected. RAs, sort of the core of their work is building that relationship. RAs are the first step for students in seeking support. And we find that when they're brought in early on, they can be really successful in helping alleviate tension or find resolutions and resources. RAs also plan events for students that hopefully help them find a sense of belonging, integrate into the community, and develop skills. And they're there after hours for things as simple as a lockout or for urgent crisis situations. And they're supervised and supported by area directors who are our full-time staff. And those area directors, they're looking at the community at a really big level, holistic level, trying to think about what is the experience of a resident living in this building and in Copeland over the course of this next year. And what are we going to be delivering to them programmatically? What are the themes that we're seeing up in transitions or in community? And they often get brought in when things escalate. So sometimes that's because the RA, despite best efforts and working with the residents, something's really, really complex, or despite those early attempts, it still hasn't found a resolution. And then the area director can get involved to help try and find new avenues or resources to a resolution. But sometimes, a lot of times, it's because something wasn't addressed early on. We're finding out about it a little bit late, or residents were unsure or they were nervous about bringing it up and what might happen if they did. And we really want them to involve campus living, involve RAs when things feel like a simple thing and someone's thinking, maybe I just shrug it off. We would still love for them to consult with an RA, have an opportunity to have that conversation with an RA who can advise them on what to do. All right, last slide. So as Katie said, mentioning FERPA, we can always collaborate with you. There are sometimes, many times, there's some limits to what we're able to talk about and divulge. But I find that some of the most enriching parent conversations I have or supporter conversations I have, I think my staff would feel the same way, are the ones where we're really talking about how we can bookend and complement our efforts to support the student in what they're experiencing. And where FERPA comes into that is that we oftentimes are talking about situations at a more abstract or hypothetical level because we can't get specifically into the student's record or the other parties involved. And so we try to talk about how we respond to similar circumstances so we can at least forecast what next steps might be ahead of us. And we can always share information from a parent conversation with a student, but we're more constrained going in the other direction. So again, approaching it from a collaborative sense, talking with students about how they feel about having their parents involved in finding resolution is helpful, because we'll sometimes be getting independent engagement from parents unbeknownst to the student. And so it's always helpful to us when it's clear that both parties are involved. And that's it for me.
Thank you. We do want to leave time for answering some questions. So I'm going to go through some stuff pretty quickly here and encourage you to recognize that we're hoping that by using all of these great supports and supporting your students' development and helping them know where to get connected, that we're going to try to prevent very much development of really serious crisis in terms of mental health. One thing that's helpful is if you're paying attention, the campus living staff are paying attention, the faculty are paying attention, and various other offices on campus where students might be working, their supervisors are paying attention. So probably there's a good chance that we'll have eyes on among all of us to be able to get students connected with resources that might help manage their whatever distress that they may be experiencing. But we do want to pay attention if we should become more concerned about a student's developing mental health into a crisis. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we have a listing here of some markers, not any one of these by itself, well, other than sort of direct references to suicide. Most of these are things that we would want to look as a pattern of change or continuation and deepening of existing mental health struggles, and that we want to reassure you we are paying attention, but we also need to know if you're concerned. And so if a crisis is escalating and you're seeing multiple changes in behavior that indicate a lot of isolation, withdrawal, changes in how your student is interacting with our community or with you, and sort of a sense that you're worried that something is developing, we want to let you know what your options are. So Katie, you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide? If you're noticing this, what we hope you will start to do are things that hopefully you've already considered and heard about before. Really listen, pay attention, ask your student not only how are they doing in their classes, but also how are their relationships? Are they making friends? Are they getting involved on campus? These are things that help them balance. If you're worried about, while you hear they're hardly sleeping at all, which is a pretty common issue, or you're feeling that they're sounding so discouraged, let them know you're hearing them, you're concerned, encourage them to connect with these resources. That really lovely website list of resources that Amy showed earlier that's linked on this presentation, which will be available, helps you to kind of know which service might be the most beneficial at any given time, developing or depending on what's going on. If you're feeling like it's hard for your student to, kind of step back from, especially students who are struggling with anxiety and worrying they're not doing enough, or who are giving up because they feel really overwhelmed, to help maybe connect their taking care of their wellness with whatever their expressed priorities may be. That might be that they've always been really focused on their health before, or they have a particular career aspiration or academics, not in the way of like, you're really messing up your chances at all, but more, how will your choices now help you to meet those priorities? Maybe their priority was to play on an athletic team and really get connected with the team, but they're not sleeping enough to take care of their health, and sort of they're risking more injury. So kind of help them think about what can help them take care of themselves in a way to meet those expressed priorities, if you feel that will help your child. I think it's really important to normalize help seeking. We're getting better about this as a society, but it needs to be within the family as well. And that help seeking may be professional counseling support. It might be talking with a coach. It might be talking with your academic advisor, or talking with your campus living staff, the RA, and just normalize it. This is a good thing to do. This is how you're starting to transition and develop that competence and independence and all those other developmental stages that we talked about earlier. If you are a person, I will tell you, really often I hear, I've been in college counseling for a couple of decades, and it really strikes students often when they hear from a parent who may have had their own struggles with some mental health concerns, and what kinds of things help them. And sometimes we haven't shared that in the family, and college students are often really benefited by being told, hey, I struggled with that and this is what I did and it really helped. I got some counseling, or I got some pastoral care, or I got more exercise, whatever it was that kind of helped you. Not to say that's going to work for them, but that is normalizing, like, I had a struggle, I did something to gather some support in my community, some professional support or some peer support. I'd encourage you, if you're concerned about your student and you're just kind of seeing the developing concerns, not yet a crisis, but you're just wondering how to help them get connected with professional care, or whether they need to. We welcome consultations at the counseling service. Because of privacy concerns, we will never be able to tell you if we can confirm or deny if we've had contact with your student or know of them. If your student chooses to, they can release us to do that, but without that, we won't. And that's to provide a safe place for them to really share openly what their struggles are, so we can help treat those concerns. But we can talk, as Ben mentioned, in generalities, like, this is what we know about college students' development, and these are some red flags, or to reassure you that things are sounds like you're on track with the kind of support you're giving them. We're happy to consult. Just give us a call or send us an email and we'll set that up. Whenever possible, with all of these things, save the crisis we're going to talk about next. Really, again, please allow your student to take the next steps. This is how they are building those skills, and sometimes being pressed, for instance, into counseling creates some resistance, more resistance to it. But being invited and sometimes can let the student make their own choice. I also want to really encourage, it's a big transition, whether it's your first, your middle, or your last student going into college. It's a different experience with every single student and every single family group. And so do seek support for yourself, so that those areas where you may struggle or you may be tempted to step in, that you can kind of try to manage those so that you're able to allow your student to take the next steps. Katie, go ahead. Thanks. Of course, we do want to act quickly if we're concerned about a potential risk of harm to oneself or others in the community, or when students are just overwhelmed with distress and they are struggling to take any action on their own. The counseling service on campus does offer urgent appointments, so kind of walk-ins on a daily basis during weekdays when the college is in session and when we're open. We are offering both in-person and telehealth services. And so students can kind of self-select to what works best with themselves and their style and their schedule and their privacy needs. And so that is available if it's something that like we can get them in today because we're concerned about them today, but we just need to do an assessment, or today or tomorrow would work. We also have an option for you called the Welfare Intervention Network for our community, and parents can make a report here. That's a way to alert outside of the confidential bubble of the counseling service, to be able to alert support staff on campus for us in a coordinated way to kind of identify students who may need a check-in from the college, and will help us to develop a coordinated plan of care for that student. And so during the day, if it's not an imminent issue of like right now, I'm not sure if my child is safe, but it's sort of a developing crisis, those are great options. If it's after hours or on weekends, a very urgent situation where we need to do a welfare check with your student and make sure that they are protected and safe, and just determine whether they need further assessment. You can call campus safety for students who are on campus. Obviously, if they're not on campus at the time that you're concerned about them, 911 would be the best first step. And then it's still helpful to notify campus safety so that we can begin to prepare support for them when they return to campus. We also do have a crisis counseling line that is, in addition to all the many crisis counseling lines out there, this one particularly we have a contract with. And so if you use the Lewis and Clark crisis counseling line, we get a report of the counseling service and the ability to be able to respond back to the student if they invite us to reach out to them. And so there is a really great network of support here, and I want to encourage you to just be aware that we are in it with you to make sure that our students are hopefully preventing the crisis, but we're going to respond if there is a crisis or if we're concerned that one may be developing. I think that is the end of my portion. Thank you. Oh, I guess I'll just jump. Fran, were you going to jump in?
Take it away, Robin.
Oh, this is a great comic that we just wanted to share that kind of encapsulates that push me, pull you that you may experience all the way through adolescence, and it just intensifies during college when they're away. And we want to invite I'm gonna turn it to Fran to talk about questions.
Yeah, we have around 5 to 10 minutes to answer any questions. I know a bunch of us have been cycling through many questions that were left in the Q&A chat. So now is the time to continue dropping those questions into the chat. For any of my fellow panelists, were there any questions you saw that you want to address with the group?
I see a couple of folks who are looking for how would they be able to get their student connected to medical resources, off-campus resources. There's a couple of asking how do we connect with the case manager. So in the Office of Student Accessibility, you will see under appointments scheduling in person and by Zoom, our case manager is Gabby Herman. So that would be the person you would schedule with to make those appointments. When you're making those appointments with Gabby, if you're a student, have your student bring their insurance card. This is another really, when you think about like, you know, do they have enough food for the first couple of weeks in terms of junk food in their room? Do they have a down comforter? Do they know how to use their insurance card? Do they know where they can call to find providers? Do they know what it means to have the insurance? Do they know what their co-pays are? Having that lesson with your student before they leave is really important. And then have them bring that to their appointment with Gabby so that when she's putting together a list of referrals, she can access that. So, and I see someone's asking about physical therapy. Gabby can help you with that. I also think that folks in the health service have lists of PT close to campus.
Mm-hmm. And to piggyback on that, there's a number of questions regarding what is available on campus with different insurance. In terms of the counseling service, I saw one that was, are all counseling services available to all students, even if not on health insurance? Yes. Counseling services are available to all students. We actually don't charge insurance. We don't have a fee for counseling, for psychotherapy or urgent counseling appointments, unless there's a no-show. We do have very limited psychiatric appointments, and there is a fee associated with that that would go through insurance, but we would explain that to students that's for students who are engaged with our counselors on campus, because we only have 10 hours a week of psychiatry. And so regardless of health insurance plan, counseling services is available on campus. We have more of a brief intermittent counseling model. And so if you know your student has been accustomed to weekly therapy all the way through high school. They may find benefit to getting established with a counselor off campus if they're able to, but certainly they're welcome to come and start with us and we can help them through that process. If you have Kaiser, I noticed also for the health services, for the office visits, there is not a fee. There are a few fees for labs and things like that that could be charged to insurance. And I think it might be worth exploring the Kaiser option directly with our health providers who are not at this panel, but they will be in some of the other parent orientation panels.
Katie, I wonder, there's a couple of questions that I think you and I may be able to tag team real quick about if a student is struggling academically, will parents be alerted? Because I think this is where things, your inkling is that your student is not doing well academically, and you're not sure what's going on. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that. I think that's an important piece for families to know that. Short answer is no, we won't be calling you to let you know.
Short answer is no, we won't call. Yeah, but I think that surprises some people.
I think so too.
So if your students failing courses, we don't call the parents to tell them.
Yeah.
In an advising meeting, so when students are struggling, we have various ways faculty can submit their concerns about a student. And like I said, there's that centralized midterm feedback system. So there's a lot of moments where we would get feedback like that. And we'll then reach out to a student and work very hard to get them to come in and talk with us. And in that conversation, I'm always going to ask a student, hey, who's aware of what's going on? Does your family know? Who's your support team? Have you talked with them about that? Just because I know feeling alone in it or let you have to keep a secret can really exacerbate things for students. So I'm encouraging that, but no, I don't pick up the phone and call the family.
Yeah. And this is where kind of going that little failure versus the big failure is that sometimes students are learning the skills by doing and by action and by failing and getting curious without judgment. Like, what can we do differently next term? It takes a couple terms here of not doing well before you're invited not to return. And so there's definitely room for students that when they don't have a successful first term, let's think about what happened different. And there's so many resources that students can tap into to make things better for them, to say like, you know what, I really struggled. I should have gotten that sob tutor. I'll tell you, one of the things I tell students all the time, that Katie, you can correct me, but I believe the average GPA of individuals who use our sob tutoring is like a 3.6. The students who are doing well tap into sob tutoring. It is a fantastic resource. It is free. It is. So I think that piece for students to know about. There's another thing I wonder about. There's some questions around storage. Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about storage maybe? And
yes, I've been answering storage in the chat.
Okay.
Where I can, but we do have a small amount of storage on campus that we use during the summer or when students are studying abroad, but there's pretty narrow eligibility criteria. We focus on some of our Davis scholars and international students and students who are Pell eligible because it's a very inexpensive storage option. And we use it to support students who are going through an unexpected circumstance and need to depart campus very quickly or for different reasons. Otherwise, we do try to offer other storage options for students who are going to be leaving for the summer that are off-campus options. We'll work with a third party to connect them. And so we will push out information to students ahead of sort of major milestones of breaks and summer to help them find storage. I see a laundry question.
Yeah.
Every building has laundry. Laundry is included in the cost of housing. You don't need to swipe or put in coins, if our students even remember what that looks like, to use the laundry here. We are working on getting an app up that allows them to check availability of laundry machines in real time and get alerts when their load is done. We hope to have that in place in the next few weeks.
I know we're at time. I have a couple of things that I think are really important One is this group will be coming back together, as Fran talked about. And so some of the information will be replicated, but there'll be other questions answered. You also have an opportunity to have, some time with us if you have a specific student question. I know I speak for all the panel to say that if you do have a question, encourage your student. Like if you and your student have come up with, I know there's a lot in there about like case management, medication management, insurance questions. If you and your student have that question, please email me directly. And I think the panelists will say the same thing, have your student email any of the panelists here with their questions, practicing that skill of self-advocacy. But I really hope that people come and to the live conversation when we do this again, because, this going to college is difficult. And then let's put on the layer of the fact that we're in this pandemic, right? There's so many different experiences that are happening that, like, when I think about sending my own kiddo to college, they weren't having the same, I did not have the same struggles, and the world was different. So we are very aware of that. And so talking specifically around what does it mean in this current environment, what's going on, we welcome those conversations. So please come to the parent program that we're doing in person, and we can continue that conversation.
Yes, and just to follow up on what everything Amy said, all of this information, as well as information on how to register for Parents Preview, is all on the new student orientation website. You can get to the website by just Googling NSO Lewis and Clark. You can always send nso@lclark.edu an email, and myself or my student assistants are happy to follow up with links. And with that being said, this webinar will be recorded, so you can also refer back to this later. We really do appreciate all of you spending some time learning about how you can best support your student as they embark on this journey. And we're very excited to see you all in 2 weeks. It's all happening very soon. Thanks, everyone.